So one of the primary things that people talk about is cost. And generally, driving and flying the airlines are thought of as cheaper. There's a reason that that is the thought process, and that is that often they are cheaper. But, just a little bit ago, we were talking about a leg that I flew in the Mooney from New Mexico to Wisconsin, and I actually burned less fuel flying the airplane than I would have driving the car.
And you did that flight in less than 5 hours,
Yes.
which is
Yes. I
pretty amazing.
definitely burned less fuel than the car would have burned at 200 miles an hour. So first of all, I would encourage those of you who feel the need to justify things via cost, look at all the costs, because GA does come out ahead sometimes. And especially if you're looking at kind of more of a mid-range trip, I would say, I guess the way I have put it once was anywhere from 150 miles to 2 times whatever the cruise speed times your cruise speed of your airplane times the endurance of your bladder. Where can you get in 2 legs? When you start having,
Did not
that one
know
I
that
don't
going
actually
into this,
use
but I'm not
myself.
surprised.
I go wherever, but I know that some of those longer trips are harder to justify, especially for family members. But yeah, so the mid-range trips are the ones where GA really shines. You know, uh, Especially if you're going someplace that is not an airline hub.
Yeah, because cost is one thing, but there's a lot of cost savings and flexibility too. And I think you're probably going to talk about that, but having flexibility of time and place can bring with it a lot of cost savings that you need to take into account as well.
Yeah. A big one is hotel rooms. Since you mentioned
Mm.
flexibility, there are plenty of times where I can fly a leg or maybe two home after a day of having fun somewhere, and I saved myself a hotel room that night. I would have had to fly out in the airlines the next day, or I would have had to have one less day of fun or whatever I was doing at my destination. So, there's plenty of times where, in fact, I would say most times, airline flying kind of takes up your whole day. Whereas I've had work trips where I work the whole day and then fly home. And, we've had pleasure vacations where we're able to get some last minute play in and then hop in the airplane and get home and not need another hotel that night. And so definitely consider whether you're going to need another night or two in a hotel and how much that's going to cost you if you fly on the airlines. And of course, the airlines love to charge fees for bags and, this and that and the other stuff. And of course, then there is also your time and your enjoyment of the trip. Being able to get somewhere faster is really nice, not having to deal with the hassles of TSA. And one of the things that made me really start thinking about this hard very early on, I think it was the same summer I got my private. I went to my cousin's wedding, and I was already in Minneapolis for other reasons. So there's time involved in all of those things. And so, you have to consider that time. But then I got to the other end, and, takes a while to get off the airplane. And then I spent 45 minutes waiting for bags at baggage claim, spent another 45 minutes in line at the rental car counter, drove an hour and a half to a town that had a perfectly good GA airport. And I went, why did I just do this? I could have gotten myself here just as fast in an Archer. So
Yeah.
that was kind of an eye-opening moment for me to have that experience and go, okay, GA is really usable for travel, even if you don't have the fanciest, fastest airplane. So definitely consider all that time and the difference in experiences between those as well. So if the actual numbers don't completely work out in your favor, consider that it might be worth a couple $100 to see some really cool sights and to not have somebody groping you in the TSA line.
Not to mention getting some great experience as a pilot.
Awesome. So as far as the cost for flying GA, fuel is the big one. You do need to look at fees. If you fly into Orlando International, which I have, you're going to pay some fees there. So be sure you call ahead to the FBO and at least, you know, find out what those fees are and what you're in for. But there are, if you're an accountant, you might think, well, I need to amortize this and divide that across the hours and blah, blah, blah.
Engine.
Here's how I look at it when I'm deciding whether or not I should financially be able to justify going somewhere in my airplane. I do not divide the entire cost by the number of hours in the year. If you do that, you'll never fly the airplane. And if you don't fly the airplane, why do you have the airplane? The way I look at it is the first hour I fly every year costs me somewhere between $12 and $28,000. I don't want to get any more accurate than that. And I'm sure that, everyone's costs are going to vary. East Coast hangars are really expensive, for example. And so, but anyway, the first hour you fly every year is horrendously expensive because, just the fact that you have an airplane, you're going to be paying for a hangar, you're going to be paying insurance, you're going to be paying for an annual inspection, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at it this way and say, okay, my first hour costs me 20 grand. All the other ones cost me,
Gas.
60. Right. Because really gas and, if you decide that you want to keep an engine reserve fund, you might want to consider that as well. But to me, the cost of travel is strictly the variable cost, the incremental cost of flying the airplane. Because, just the decision you made to own an airplane is what cost you that first 20 grand or whatever it is. The more you fly it, the cheaper it is. And that's absolutely true. Airplanes love to fly. They get cheaper to maintain the more hours you put on them. And so by looking at it that way and being able to justify trips means that, my average per hour price goes down just because I'm using the airplane more. So
It also gives you flexibility to find cheaper fuel.
absolutely